My name is Sarah Chen. I'm 32 years old, and I never imagined I'd be standing outside a locked boardroom, clutching a presentation I'd poured my soul into, only to hear my boss, Mr. Henderson, say those words through the barely cracked door. We all agreed, "You're not welcome at the investor meeting, Sarah. It's for the best." For the best? For whose best, exactly? The muffled sounds of polite laughter from inside, the clinking of glasses, the self-congratulatory tone of my colleague, Mark, the office golden boy, starting my presentation, felt like a physical blow. I could almost hear him taking credit for every late night, every skipped lunch, every innovative idea that was undeniably mine. The humiliation burned, hot and sharp, from my cheeks down to my stomach. He'd done it again. They'd all done it again. Pushed me aside, made me invisible, stolen my work. But what they didn't know, what none of them in that room knew, was that this particular humiliation, this blatant act of sabotage, wasn't just another slight I'd swallow. Oh no. This was the catalyst. This was the moment the ground beneath their smug, comfortable world began to fracture, all because they underestimated me one too many times. They thought I was just a quiet workhorse, easily dismissed. They had no idea I was about to orchestrate a comeback that would not only expose their deceit, but would also change the power dynamics in that company forever. Have you ever poured your heart and soul into something at work, only to have someone else try to take the credit, or worse, completely sideline you? It's a terrible feeling, isn't it? Share your story in the comments below if you've ever felt invisible or underestimated. Let's show each other we're not alone in these battles. And don't forget to subscribe, because you won't want to miss how this particular story unfolds. It wasn't always this blatant, this cruel. Or maybe I was just more naive when I first joined Sterling & Finch Capital 3 years ago, bright-eyed and eager to make my mark in the cutthroat world of investment banking. I'd graduated top of my class, aced every interview, and genuinely believed that hard work and talent were all that mattered. How wrong I was. The culture at S&F, I soon learned, was less a meritocracy and more an old boys' club, presided over by Mr. Henderson, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes and whose praise was reserved almost exclusively for one person, Mark Preston. Mark. Just saying his name leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. He joined the firm 6 months after me, all charm and feigned camaraderie, but with a fraction of the analytical skills or dedication. Yet from day one, Henderson treated him like a protege, the son he never had. Mark could do no wrong. If he was late, it was because he was networking. If he missed a deadline, it was because he was fine-tuning perfection. If I did either, I was unreliable or not managing my time effectively. The double standard was a constant, grinding weight on my spirit. I remember the first major project I spearheaded, a deep dive analysis into emerging tech markets. I worked 80-hour weeks for 2 months, fueled by coffee and the belief that this was my chance to shine. I compiled a comprehensive report, innovative strategies, solid projections. I presented it to Henderson, my heart pounding with a mixture of pride and nervousness. He listened, nodded, asked a few cursory questions, and then said, "Good groundwork, Sarah. Leave it with me." 2 weeks later, at the quarterly review meeting with senior partners, Mark stood at the podium, presenting my slides, my data, my strategies, with a few superficial tweaks and a confident swagger that made my blood boil. Henderson beamed at him, clapping him on the back, saying, "Excellent initiative, Mark. This is the kind of forward thinking we need." When I tried to speak to Henderson about it afterwards, privately, respectfully, he waved me away. "It's a team effort, Sarah. Mark has a knack for presentation. You're good at the details, he's good at the delivery. It's a win-win." A win-win for whom? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The injustice was so raw, so blatant, yet I had no recourse. That became the pattern. I'd burn the midnight oil, crunching numbers, developing models, finding the overlooked opportunities. Mark would swoop in at the last minute, charm Henderson, and somehow my work would become our work, and then, magically, his achievement. My ideas were too niche or too academic when they came from me, but visionary and bold when Mark rephrased them. I was constantly asked to help Mark out with his analyses, which essentially meant doing his job for him. He'd take me out for a coffee, pick my brain for hours, then regurgitate my insights in meetings as if they were his own epiphanies. The few times I tried to claim my contributions more assertively in meetings, Henderson would cut me off with a condescending, "Yes, yes, Sarah, we know you're thorough," before turning back to Mark for the bigger picture. It was like I was speaking a different language, one they refused to understand. Promotions came and went. Mark, despite a string of mediocre performances and bailed-out projects, bailed out by me mostly, climbed the ladder with astonishing speed. Each time, Henderson would call me into his office, give me some vague platitude about my value to the team in my current role and how patience is a virtue. He'd say things like, "You're a solid worker, Sarah, very dependable, but leadership requires a certain presence." What he meant was, leadership required being male, and preferably a golfing buddy. The sexism wasn't always overt, not always something you could point a finger at and definitively call out without sounding oversensitive, but it was there, a suffocating undercurrent in every interaction, every decision. I was asked to take notes in meetings far more often than my male counterparts, even those junior to me. My suggestions were often met with a patronizing, "That's a cute idea, Sarah," before being dismissed, only to be applauded when Mark or another male colleague repackaged it 5 minutes later. The investor presentation that led to me being locked out, that was supposed to be my breakthrough. It was a billion-dollar potential deal, a complex merger I'd identified and meticulously researched for over 6 months. This wasn't just data analysis. This was strategic vision, financial modeling of the highest order, risk assessment that was second to none. I'd lived and breathed this project. I'd even presented the initial findings to Henderson, and surprisingly, he'd seemed genuinely impressed. He'd said, "This is exceptional, Sarah. You'll present this to the investors. This is your baby." For a fleeting moment, I'd allowed myself to hope. I'd rehearsed my presentation countless times, anticipated every possible question, polished every slide until it gleamed. The night before, I'd even bought a new suit, wanting to look and feel my absolute best. Then, an hour before the meeting, Henderson had called me into his office. Mark was there, looking smug. "Sarah," Henderson began, avoiding eye contact, "we've had a bit of a rethink. Mark has a better rapport with these particular investors. He's going to lead the presentation. We think it's best for the company." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "But you said I would present. It's my research, my entire strategy," I'd stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Henderson just shrugged. "It's a collaborative effort. Mark will do it justice. You can support him from the sidelines." Support him from the sidelines. That was my designated place, apparently. Forever in the shadows, doing the heavy lifting while others basked in the spotlight. The casual cruelty of it, the absolute disregard for my work, my dedication. It was a new low, even for them. And that's how I ended up outside that boardroom, listening to my work being stolen yet again. The anger and frustration had been simmering for years, but that day it ignited into a cold, hard resolve. They thought they had broken me. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. In that toxic swamp of Sterling and Finch, there was one person, just one, who seemed to see past the facade, who recognized the actual work being done and the intellect behind it. That was Ms. Eleanor Vance. She was a managing director in a completely different division, risk management, a department most of the flashy investment bankers like Henderson and Mark viewed with a kind of disdain as a necessary but boring bureaucratic hurdle. Ms. Vance, however, was anything but boring. She was sharp, incisive, and had a reputation for not suffering fools gladly, regardless of their title or connections. She was in her late 50s, impeccably dressed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that could intimidate even the most arrogant executives. And for some reason, she'd taken a quiet interest in me. Our interactions were infrequent at first. She'd occasionally be part of larger cross-departmental meetings where I might present some data. I noticed she'd ask pointed questions, not to trip me up, but to genuinely understand the nuances. Unlike Henderson, who'd gloss over details, Ms. Vance would drill down. And unlike others who might dismiss my more complex analyses, she seemed to appreciate the depth. A few times, after such meetings, she'd stop me in the hallway. "Good work on that regression analysis, Chen," she'd say, her tone neutral but her eyes conveying a flicker of approval. Or, "That projection model you built for the European market was robust. Did Henderson even understand the variables?" She had a way of cutting straight to the chase. I remember one particularly demoralizing afternoon. Mark had just presented another one of my meticulously researched proposals as his own, receiving lavish praise from Henderson. I was sitting at my desk, trying to swallow the familiar bitterness, when Ms. Vance walked by. She paused, looked at me, then at the remnants of the celebratory cake for Mark still on the communal table, and then back at me. She didn't say anything about Mark or Henderson. Instead, she said, "Chen, I'm reviewing the quarterly risk assessments for the tech portfolio. Your initial groundwork on those emerging market reports from last year would be insightful. Could you send them over to me directly? I prefer to see the raw data before it's filtered." That was a turning point. It was a small gesture, but it was huge for me. Someone in a position of power acknowledged my original work. She wasn't just asking for the polished, Henderson-approved version. She wanted my raw data, my unfiltered analysis. From then on, our interactions became slightly more regular, though always discreet. She'd sometimes email me directly with a technical question about a financial model or ask for my opinion on a specific market trend, bypassing the usual chain of command, bypassing Henderson and Mark. She never explicitly criticized them to me, but her actions spoke volumes. She'd say things like, "Your ability to identify underlying risk factors is uncommon in your department," or, "It's refreshing to see someone who actually reads the footnotes in a financial statement." She became a silent mentor, in a way. She never offered overt career advice or promised to intervene on my behalf. That wasn't her style. But her quiet validation, her trust in my analytical capabilities, was like a lifeline. It reminded me that my skills had value, even if they weren't recognized by the people who directly controlled my career trajectory at SNF. She'd occasionally forward me articles on complex financial instruments or new regulatory changes with a simple note, "Thought this might interest you." It did. And it showed me she saw me as an intellectual peer, not just an underling. Once, after I'd spent weeks developing a complex stress testing model for a volatile new asset class, a model Mark had dismissed as too complicated for clients to understand, Ms. Vance specifically requested I walk her through it. We spent nearly 2 hours in her office, just the two of us, as I explained the algorithms, the assumptions, the potential failure points. She listened intently, asking sharp, insightful questions that pushed my thinking even further. At the end, she simply nodded and said, "This is precisely the kind of rigorous analysis this firm needs more of, Chen. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Complexity isn't the enemy. Superficiality is." That comment stayed with me. It was a shield against the casual dismissals I faced daily from Henderson and Mark. It was a reminder that genuine competence would eventually be recognized, even if it took an unexpected path. Knowing Ms. Vance saw my worth, even if she couldn't directly change my day-to-day struggles with my immediate superiors, gave me a sliver of hope and, more importantly, the resolve to keep honing my skills, to keep pushing, even when it felt like I was shouting into a void. Her silent support was a crucial ingredient in the resilience I was slowly building. While Henderson and Mark were busy patting each other on the back and taking credit for my labor, I wasn't just idly enduring the slights. The incident with the investor meeting, being physically barred from presenting my own billion-dollar deal, was the final brutal shove I needed. That evening, after the initial wave of humiliation and fury subsided, a cold, hard clarity settled in. I realized that playing by their rules, hoping for fairness in an unfair system, was a fool's errand. If I wanted to reclaim my work, my dignity, and my future, I had to build my own leverage, my own power, silently and strategically. So, my silent rise began. Outwardly, at Sterling and Finch, I maintained a veneer of quiet diligence. I did the work assigned to me, though I stopped going the extra 10 miles on projects that I knew Mark would inevitably hijack. I still did it well, impeccably so, because my professional pride demanded it. But the passion, the innovative spark I once poured into SNF's projects, I began to redirect. My real work, my true focus, shifted to the hours outside the office, to the clandestine efforts they knew nothing about. The first step was meticulous documentation. Every stolen idea, every instance of Mark presenting my work as his own, every condescending remark from Henderson, every time I was unfairly passed over or my contributions were minimized, I started a detailed log. Dates, times, specific projects, email trails where possible, even verbatim quotes I jotted down immediately after meetings. It was a grim task, reliving those moments of injustice, but I knew that evidence would be crucial. This wasn't just about feeling wronged, it was about building a case, even if I wasn't sure yet exactly how or when I would use it. Simultaneously, I doubled down on my skills and my network, but this time, for myself. I enrolled in advanced courses in financial engineering and data science, areas where I already excelled but knew deeper expertise would be an undeniable asset. I spent my weekends not recovering from a soul-crushing work week, but at industry seminars, workshops, and networking events, the kind Henderson and Mark deemed unnecessary for someone at my level, especially a woman. They preferred their networking on the golf course or at exclusive clubs I wasn't invited to. But I found other avenues. I connected with professionals from other firms, academics, tech innovators. I wasn't just collecting business cards. I was building genuine relationships, exchanging ideas, and crucially, letting my expertise shine in environments where it was appreciated. The investor presentation they'd locked me out of, the one concerning the acquisition of a cutting-edge AI-driven fintech company called Novacore Analytics, became my secret obsession. I knew that deal inside out. I had identified Novacore, built the valuation models, and outlined the strategic integration plan. Mark might have been delivering the slides, but he didn't understand the soul of the deal, the nuances, the real potential, or the hidden risks I'd also flagged. So, while they were celebrating their win with the initial investor pitch, I started a back channel. Through a contact I'd made at a fintech conference, a mid-level executive at Novacore who was impressed by my understanding of their technology, I began to subtly feed information. Not confidential S&F information, of course. I was far too careful for that. But I shared my publicly available analyses on the market, my perspectives on the strategic fit, the kind of deep insights that demonstrated a far more profound understanding of Novacore's value proposition than Mark, with his superficial grasp, could ever convey. I knew the CEO of Novacore, Dr. Aris Thorne, was a visionary, a brilliant but notoriously cautious man. I suspected he wouldn't be easily swayed by Mark's slick charm alone. He'd want substance. I also started to cultivate my relationship with Ms. Vance more proactively, though still with utmost discretion. I'd share some of my more advanced modeling work with her, under the guise of seeking her risk assessment expertise. She, in turn, began to include me in slightly more sensitive discussions within her own department, exposing me to higher-level strategic thinking at the firm. She never asked why I was suddenly so focused on self-improvement and external networking, but I saw a knowing look in her eyes sometimes. I think she understood I was preparing for something, building an escape route or a launch pad. All this was happening in the shadows. At the office, I was still quiet Sarah, the reliable analyst. Mark would still throw his sloppy work on my desk at 5 p.m. on a Friday, expecting me to fix it. Henderson would still make his patronizing comments. They had no idea that with every passing day, I was becoming more formidable, more connected, more armed with knowledge and evidence. They saw me as a cog in their machine, easily replaceable, easily silenced. They never once suspected that the cog was meticulously sharpening its teeth, preparing to grind their machine to a halt. The long hours, the sacrifices, the constant need for secrecy were exhausting, but the thought of the eventual reckoning, the moment I could finally expose them, fueled me like nothing else. They were so busy looking down on me, they never saw me rising. If this story of quiet resilience and building strength in the face of adversity resonates with you, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel create more content like this, for everyone who's ever had to fight to be seen. The day of reckoning arrived 3 months after I was barred from the investor meeting. Sterling and Finch was hosting a major press conference and internal town hall to announce the successful acquisition of Novacore Analytics. Henderson was practically vibrating with self-importance, and Mark was preening like a peacock, ready to take his victory lap. The main conference room was packed. Senior partners, department heads, key staff, and a gaggle of financial journalists. I was there, seated in the back, just another face in the crowd. Or so they thought. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a mixture of terror and exhilaration. This was it. All those months of silent work, of biting my tongue, of carefully laying the groundwork, it all came down to this moment. Henderson stepped up to the podium, beaming. "Good morning, everyone. It is with immense pride that we announce Sterling & Finch's landmark acquisition of Novacor Analytics, a true game-changer in the fintech space. This deal, valued at $1.2 billion, positions us at the forefront of AI-driven financial solutions." He paused for applause, then continued. "And the architect of this incredible success, the man whose vision and tenacity made this possible, is our very own rising star, Mark Preston." Mark practically bounded to the podium, shaking Henderson's hand, a wide, smug grin plastered on his face. He launched into a speech about his tireless efforts, his innovative approach, his late nights. He even had the audacity to say, "Identifying Novacor as a strategic target required a unique insight into the evolving tech landscape, an insight I was fortunate to possess." I could feel my blood pressure rising, but I kept my expression carefully neutral. I glanced at Ms. Vance, who was seated near the front. She gave me the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. Mark was just hitting his stride, basking in the glow of the media's cameras, when a new figure walked calmly onto the stage from the side entrance. It was Dr. Eris Thorne, the CEO of Novacor. A hush fell over the room. Henderson and Mark looked surprised, then pleased, probably assuming he was there to further sing their praises. Dr. Thorne, a man with an intense gaze and an air of quiet authority, approached the podium. He shook Mark's hand briefly, then Henderson's, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson, Mr. Preston," he began, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "Novacor is indeed excited about the potential of this merger. We believe Sterling & Finch has the resources to help us scale our innovations globally." He paused, and then his eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment when they met mine. My breath caught in my throat. "However, Dr. Thorne continued, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "I feel it's important to clarify a few points for the record, especially concerning the genesis of this deal and the individual whose remarkable analytical depth truly convinced us of Sterling & Finch's strategic alignment with our vision." Henderson's smile faltered. Mark looked confused, then a little nervous. Dr. Thorne went on. "While Mr. Preston was the public face of the negotiations, and a charming one at that, a slight, almost ironic smile touched his lips. The foundational analysis, the deep understanding of our technology, the brilliant strategic roadmap for integration, and indeed, the initial identification of Novacor as a prime acquisition target came from someone else within your organization. You could have heard a pin drop." Henderson was starting to look pale. Mark's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. "Over the past few months," Dr. Thorne stated, his voice ringing with conviction, "I and my board have been exceptionally impressed by the detailed, insightful, and frankly, visionary work of Ms. Sarah Chen." He turned and looked directly at me, a genuine smile now on his face. "Ms. Chen, would you please join us on stage?" A wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. All heads turned towards me. I felt like I was moving in slow motion as I stood up and walked towards the stage, my legs surprisingly steady. The shock on Henderson's face was a picture. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mark was frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his complexion turning a sickly shade of green. As I reached the stage, Dr. Thorne shook my hand warmly. "Ms. Chen's understanding of our core algorithms and her proposals for leveraging our AI in new market segments were quite frankly what sealed this deal for us. We were so impressed, in fact, that a condition of this acquisition, one that Mr. Henderson and Mr. Preston are perhaps only now fully appreciating, is that Ms. Chen will be appointed as the new head of the integrated Novacor division within Sterling & Finch, reporting directly to me and the SNF board with full strategic oversight. The room erupted, not with applause this time, but with a cacophony of stunned whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, and the distinct sound of jaws hitting the floor. Henderson looked like he was about to choke. His face had gone from pale to a blotchy red. Mark just stared, utterly dumbfounded, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Dr. Thorne then gestured to a large screen behind them. And to further illustrate the depth of Ms. Chen's contribution, we've prepared a brief overview of her original proposal, time-stamped, and I believe, quite illuminating. The screen lit up with slides. My slides, my original analysis, my name clearly watermarked on each one, alongside dates that predated Mark's involvement by months. It was undeniable. The evidence of my work, my stolen work, was there for everyone to see, broadcast in glorious high definition. The humiliation radiating from Henderson and Mark was palpable. They were exposed, not just as incompetent, but as deceitful. The reporters were having a field day, their cameras flashing, capturing every moment of their public disgrace. Henderson tried to stammer something, some pathetic attempt at damage control, but Dr. Thorne simply held up a hand. Sterling and Finch is acquiring Novacor for its innovation and its talent, Dr. Thorne said firmly, his gaze sweeping over Henderson and Mark with undisguised contempt. We believe in recognizing and rewarding true talent. Ms. Chen is that talent. The future of this division, and a significant portion of Sterling and Finch's future success in this sector, rests on her leadership. He then turned to me, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. Congratulations, Ms. Chen. The floor is yours. I stepped up to the podium, the very podium from which Mark had been so arrogantly taking credit for my work just minutes before. I looked out at the stunned faces, at Henderson's apoplectic expression, at Mark's utter devastation, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated triumph. The silence in the room was absolute as they waited for me to speak. My voice, when it came, was clear and strong. Thank you, Dr. Thorne. I'm honored, and I'm ready to get to work. The aftermath of that press conference was swift and brutal for Henderson and Mark. The news of their deception, coupled with Dr. Thorne's very public endorsement of me and the clear evidence of my work, spread like wildfire through the financial district and beyond. The SNF board, faced with a public relations nightmare and the undeniable terms of the Novacor acquisition, had no choice but to act. Within 48 hours, Henderson was encouraged to pursue early retirement. The official statement was polite, thanking him for his years of service, but everyone knew it was a forced exit. His reign of favoritism and casual misogyny was over. I didn't see him leave, but I heard his office was cleared out over a weekend, quietly and unceremoniously. There was no farewell party, no golden handshake celebrated in the press. Just a quiet, ignominious end to a long and ultimately tarnished career. Mark's fate was even more immediate. His rising star status imploded spectacularly. He was, to put it mildly, a pariah. His colleagues, who had once eagerly sought his favor or laughed at his jokes, now avoided eye contact. The investors he'd supposedly charmed were now questioning everything he'd ever presented. His credibility was shot. He was stripped of all major responsibilities related to the Novacor deal, which was essentially his entire portfolio at that point. He lingered for about a week, a ghost haunting the hallways, his usual arrogance replaced by a hollow-eyed desperation. Then he too was gone. I heard he resigned before he could be formally fired, but the result was the same. His career at Sterling and Finch, and likely in any high-level finance role for the foreseeable future, was over. The shift in the office dynamic was almost instantaneous. People who had barely acknowledged my existence before were now stopping by my new office, a spacious corner one, I might add, that came with my new role, to offer congratulations, or, more often, to subtly try and curry favor. It was amusing, in a way, to see how quickly allegiances shifted when the power balance changed. I was polite, professional, but I didn't forget who had stood by silently while I was being undermined, or worse, who had actively participated in it. My first official act as head of the integrated Novacor division was to assemble my own team. I handpicked analysts and strategists based on merit, on skill, on their proven ability to think critically and work collaboratively, qualities that had been sorely lacking in Henderson's old regime. I made a point of promoting talented women and individuals from diverse backgrounds who, like me, had often been overlooked. Ms. Vance, my silent ally, became a key advisor and a member of my steering committee. Her wisdom and integrity were invaluable as we navigated the integration. A few days after the press conference, Mark actually had the audacity to try and approach me. He caught me near the elevators, looking disheveled and desperate. "Sarah," he began, his voice wheedling. "Look, I know things got out of hand. There were pressures, you know? Henderson, he had his ways. He was trying to shift the blame, to paint himself as a victim of circumstance. Maybe we could talk? Clear the air? I'm sure we can still work together, find a way forward." I just looked at him, my expression unyielding. The years of suppressed anger, of quiet frustration, were now replaced by a calm, steely resolve. "Mark," I said, my voice even, "there is no we. You made your choices. You built your career on the backs of others, on deceit. You and Mr. Henderson created a toxic environment where talent was stifled and integrity was a foreign concept. The air is perfectly clear to me. There is nothing further to discuss." I then turned and stepped into the elevator, leaving him standing there, his pathetic excuses hanging in the empty air. I never saw him again. Henderson, surprisingly, sent me a short, stilted email a week later. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was more of a self-pitying lament about how things had unfortunately unfolded, and a vague expression of regret if any misunderstandings occurred. Misunderstandings? He had systematically tried to destroy my career and take credit for my most significant achievements. I didn't even bother to reply. His words were meaningless. The only thing that mattered was that he was gone, and the culture he fostered was being dismantled. I established new rules, new protocols. Transparency became paramount. Ideas were credited to their originators. Collaboration was genuine, not a euphemism for idea theft. Performance was judged on actual results, not on who you played golf with. It wasn't easy. Changing an entrenched corporate culture is like turning a battleship. But with Dr. Thorne's backing and the support of a growing number of colleagues who were tired of the old ways, we began to make progress. My new division started to thrive, exceeding all initial projections for the NovaCore integration. The success was undeniable, and it was built on a foundation of respect, integrity, and genuine talent. I had not only reclaimed my work, I was now in a position to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to others, and that, in many ways, was the sweetest victory of all. Looking back on that whole chaotic, painful, and ultimately transformative period of my life, I realized that true empowerment doesn't come from external validation, though being recognized is certainly satisfying. It comes from within. It comes from knowing your own worth, even when the world around you tries to diminish it. It comes from resilience, from the refusal to be broken by injustice, and from the courage to build your own path, even if you have to do it in secret, one painstaking step at a time. The humiliation I felt standing outside that boardroom, listening to Mark steal my work, was a profound turning point. It could have crushed me. For a while it almost did, but instead, it ignited a fire. It forced me to stop waiting for fairness and start creating my own. It taught me that sometimes the greatest power comes not from shouting the loudest, but from working the smartest, from building undeniable competence, and from choosing your moment with precision. My revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't just about seeing Henderson and Mark get their comeuppance, satisfying as that was. It was about reclaiming my narrative, my work, and my future. It was about proving that talent and integrity can and should triumph over deceit and favoritism. The real victory wasn't just the public exposure of their wrongdoing. It was the opportunity to build something better in its place, a work environment where people are valued for their contributions, not their connections or their gender. This journey taught me that allies can come from unexpected places, like Ms. Vance, whose quiet belief in me was a steady anchor in a turbulent sea. It also taught me that your greatest weapon against those who underestimate you is your own relentless pursuit of excellence. They can steal your ideas, They can try to sideline you, but they can't take away your knowledge, your skills, or your determination unless you let them. My story isn't unique, unfortunately. So many people, especially women, face similar battles in their careers, being overlooked, undervalued, having their ideas dismissed or appropriated. The details might be different, but the underlying themes of injustice and the struggle for recognition are universal. What would you have done in my place? How have you navigated similar challenges in your own life or career? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and your stories in the comments below. Sharing our experiences is a powerful way to support each other and to show that no one is alone in these fights. And if my journey resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more stories of turnaround and triumph. Let's continue to inspire each other to stand tall, own our worth, and never let anyone dim our shine.